this game is better because it's open world. A phrase which you may encounter every now and then, but just how true is this statement? Well, obviously, it's not. The good or bad of a game's map design will entirely depend on many factors surrounding it. From the core gameplay loop, world interaction, and in the case of racing games, how well they can accommodate the handling model. It provides its players the enjoyment of simply driving and tackling the challenges of handling their chosen vehicles. It may sound simple on the surface. After all, what you just need to do is lay down some asphalt, make sure the car can stay on it, and you're done. Right? Well, things get extremely complicated once we start taking into account numerous permutations, such as having a number of selectable vehicles with different handling models, customizable performance, random traffic, and every single gimmick that would normally take the spotlight. Even on a non-open world title, the challenge of developing proper good tracks would require a ton of pre-planning and design phases, but of course it still comes with its own benefits. The designers and developers get to really focus on the core gameplay, making sure each track complements the strengths of the gameplay mechanics, setting the pace of the whole game by setting each track's access, time spent, and progression, providing unique visuals without overly straining hardware performance, and setting the personality of each track. In certain cases, they can be utilized for an organic difficulty flow without the risk of simply overextending the length of each race, or even to enforce specific mechanics for players to really dig into the gameplay. With so many abundant examples to choose from, where else to start other than the most familiar example we can get? Aiming to be as realistic as possible, being one of the biggest titles with near accurate recreation of real-life tracks, but that statement would only be true from Gran Turismo 2 and onwards. The very first title didn't really have any notable real tracks to mention, as every single one in the title are purely made by the sheer power of Kazunori's vision. Yet the design philosophy of these tracks are done very well, to the point of being iconic and even could be viable as a legal racetrack, as well balances utilization of high-speed straights, back straights, and varieties of corners to challenge players. Their designs are so well done, they've been pretty much kept in throughout the series with certain changes with Deep Forest Raceway, Trial Mountain, and the High Speed Ring. Gran Turismo 2 would then increase the track count from 11 to 30 different tracks, introducing several well-known real-life tracks such as Laguna Seca, street circuits with Rome and Seattle, rally content with a number of tracks from Tahiti, Smoky Mountain, and the ever-popular Pikes Peak climb, with a downhill variation available. Gran Turismo 3 would unfortunately drop the amount of tracks from 30 to a mere 20, and due to having more championships to beat and the RNG-based prize cars, this means repeating a lot of the same racetracks, often with varying car types and performance levels. And this is unfortunately one of the biggest problems with Gran Turismo's track and difficulty dichotomy, as oftentimes all they did was simply change the lap count and be done with it. Over the time, the number of licensed tracks would increase as well, to the point of getting close to the 50-50 ratio of fictional and real-life tracks, with Gran Turismo 4 expanding the list to 51 tracks in total, albeit it still ended up having some of the same design issues as GT3, which brings us to the 7th gen era, a thriving era for the online functionality, introducing the feature to change, remove, or add content after the official launch for developers. With this, more tracks got added in, remodeled, and brought back via expansions: Spa, 2 kart spaces, special stage Route X, and a remodel of Twin Rig Motegi. But there's one other interesting bit about the tracks in GT5. If you remember, Gran Turismo 5 features 2 car specifications, Standard and Premium, the former being old cars from previous titles simply ripped and plopped down into the game. And so they actually did store old assets with the tracks, except they're hidden. You can access old tracks with specific methods of using emulators or a PS3 with debug menus, which can be interesting due to the physics change. Also, this is somehow the only way to drive on Pikes Peak in a modern setup, a track that last appeared in GT2 and has never returned, despite Polyphony having the license to use the track itself. GT6 on the other hand gave the team a bit more leeway now that they are experienced with the PS3 architecture. The result itself is an abundance of content including tracks reaching up to the moon. Even in Kaz's insane vision, he still has to keep it real, although it's certainly not all perfect. Some spotty track records like with the Cope Ring, and over-reliance on repeating tracks with higher lap counts. A lot of the legacy tracks are getting the makeover treatment for GT Sport and 7 in the hopes of being more viable for competitive settings at the cost of having some weird visual redesigns. And yet, even to this day, Gran Turismo is still one of the best examples of a proper use of realistic track designs. Even throughout the ages with its changes and constant redesigns, almost Almost every track introduced by the game, whether it be fictional or real, always shines in more ways than one, maximizing the ideas and personality of the game even when the series starts to shift towards the competitive and esports scenes. For a simpler example, try to compare two clips of the same track between GT and Forza Motorsport. There's just something that keeps Gran Turismo's presentation unique from the rest of the genre. But what happens if we move away from realistic designs? Tokyo Xtreme Racer has one of the more interesting design choices out of the Japanese titles available. Both its mainline and drift series have faithfully recreated the scenes of the Japanese highways and mountain roads to even the weirdly niche Japanese rally scene. Although their constant handling change definitely leaves something to be desired, but there's a good reason for its consistent track design. In the same vein of Gran Turismo embodying the soul of track racing and motorsports, TXR embodies the magic and vibe of Japanese street racing scene at its cultural height, hence the choice of its racing platform. But for the sake of simplicity, let's cover the drift title first. As the name might imply, the series is mostly about drifting. Well, not really. The majority of its races are 1v1 challenges and time trials. Sometimes we get the 1v2 races or the more annoying drift events, all taking place on the many and iconic mountain roads of Japan, starting from Hakone in all three games and often ending at Zao, Aso, or Hokkaido. And with each title, every single one of these tracks are redesigns with two things in mind: looking beautiful and to accommodate the racing activities while trying to keep the road as accurate as possible to the real counterparts. The method of track chosen to be unlocked in specific sections are also designed to have that organic feel to difficulty progression. Early track like Hakone being very simple with its straights and simple turns, to the extremely iconic hairpin turns of Irohazaka, the hazardous snowy plains of Aso and Zao with their long straights, with the pinnacle of Hokkaido, the only rally course in the series with its full gravel course. But how well do they complement the gameplay? Well, it's a bit complicated. For the usual toge races, they would be well done, but every now and then with the fast opponents, you end up having to rely on cheese tactics like wall grinding or surfing the opponent, which mostly comes at the fault of the way the rivals are designed with extreme rubber band at the highest levels. But even without the rivals, some flaws with the track designs can still be discovered. Primarily its inaccurate collision model, which can be a lot worse in the narrow tracks or during the so-called CAT event. On the other hand, the mainline series delves more into the highway racing scene, so instead of having each chunk of track be separated by a menu selection, each road is directly connected, allowing players to go from one side of the map to the other by the simple method of driving there, turning the entire map into a set of interconnected roads and tracks, with each area populated by designated rival crews and special wanderer rivals which you will have to look, chase down, and challenge down the long winding roads. Each release would always contain the iconic C1 loop, with later edition adding the ever-popular Wangan speedline, Yokohama, Yokohane, and in TXR3 the addition of Nagoya and Osaka highway routes as separate selectable stages. And since most of the races here are essentially SP battles with not much variety, it easily dissuades any attempts at wall riding, with some sections being more challenging with balancing speed and handling either from the highway routes itself or the random traffic spawns. In the case of the Wangan section though, nonetheless, if there's one thing that Genki excels at, is with its lore building, as each track and junction are always tied to the writing of each rival and their positioning, giving each portion of the track their unique identity without having to go over the top via the power of writing. But not all racing games had this benefit, especially when we get to the games that prioritize gameplay over everything else, without caring much for logistics or realism for its visual track design. Early lives for both Need for Speed and Burnout is a weird yet stable era for their designs. From the very first title up to Hot Pursuit 2, the series had stayed true to using linear tracks taking place in many different areas of the world, just so they can show off the cool landscapes, and in some cases they can be a bit silly with it, allowing them to go a bit crazy with gameplay purposes by taking ideas from kart racer track designs. A good decision, as it gives these tracks some level of depth and options. For Need for Speed, it was pretty much the case early on, but as the Need for Speed series started to embrace the open world design, the linear track design started to dwindle, with games like Pro Street heavily utilizing its festival themes to provide unique identities for its fictional and real-life tracks, creating a massive list of alternative tracks for the different types of racing hosted, arguably having more gameplay diversity than even most modern festival racers. The Shift series, they're alright. Hot Pursuit 2010 harkening back to the old classic high-speed thrilling formula, with the twist of having linear tracks taking place in a singular interconnected map. This game was also the first to introduce brake to drift as a mechanic, starting a massive massive design shift that would last to the unforeseen future. And finally, the run, Black Box's final entry, giving Need for Speed the cinematic experience touch and giving us chunks of each part of the US as separate tracks designed for the different objectives dictated by the story. If we take a look at all these examples, one thing stands out. Pro Street's use of both fictional and real tracks gets its spotlight thanks to the massive visual overhaul to sell its theme. Yet it's a game with at least 3 handling models for grip, drift, and speed races. Each of their tracks are designed to fit with the gameplay, and in most cases they work very well with their respective parts. I did say most. The Shift games played it straight with the close track racing for its more sim-oriented approach, and the Run, due to its extremely linear nature, have way more high-speed highway races, open roads, challenges from traffic, assortments of quick-time events, special events happening throughout the plot, which often turns into a time trial gauntlet. But Burnout, while early on it was a sort of similar manner, simpler track designs with more visual flares to uphold the gameplay, which were pretty basic, until Burnout 3 came along and introduced its iconic feature. Now the map design has to be escalated to amplify the bombastic and adrenaline-fueled gameplay loop. The layouts have to complement high-speed action, accommodating the constant build-up from taking down opponents, decorations, and traffic setup to complement said takedown mechanics, giving the game a much-needed risk and reward loop, while also having unique visuals. It is genuinely impressive to see how much they do, with the amount of special takedowns you can do on every single stage. This kind of embracing the chaos into the stage design is exactly why games like Burnout are fondly remembered, making it no surprise to see this game be up there as one of the best when it comes to linear track designs. And then there's Paradise. But before we go there, let's start from the very basics. Open world racing games themselves have existed as far as the year of 1986, with this, a game called Turbo Esprit, a game where the title would tell you pretty much what you'll be doing the whole game, driving a Lotus Turbo Esprit. The basic premise of the game and open world itself is the ability to explore the whole map of the game without being separated by loading screens. This puts a lot of stress into the hardware, why a lot of open world games make it a hard requirement to have them installed on an SSD in recent years, so imagine how it was back in the 80s. Burnout Paradise fortunately did not have that limitation. It came out during a time when open world racing games have become the norm, turning what was once a racing game taking place in multiple areas around the globe into a game taking place in one massive area. The benefits come from having an open track racing design. The tracks are not heavily limited with barriers as it once was, allowing players to switch routes on the fly. This however comes at the cost of lower racing pace consistency. Takedowns happen way less often. As a result, nitros gets refilled way less often, causing the pacing of each race going up and down on random occasions. Meanwhile, the exploration can be a bit interesting, with the task of taking down rivals with new vehicles to add them to your collection. There's also the billboards, gate smash, super jumps, each unlocking a special vehicle upon completion. The layout of the map itself has the usual combination of several city zones and a wilderness area taking us up to the mountains for additional verticality, with a DLC adding an extra island off the coast. But ultimately, the map design of Burnout Paradise is mostly okay, and I believe it's primarily because of racing being the main priority for its design. With the lack of fast travel, each time you go from one race to another, you're actively incentivized to learn the roads. Take note of any notable shortcuts, barriers, and ramps that you can use against the opponents, as each path can be used in racing, heavily indicating despite the transition to the open world, the design philosophy hasn't changed much to the old system, just simply limited in terms of visual diversity, which is not exactly a bad thing, but it does put the question of, should they convert this to an open world? Then if they could. When a racing game becomes open world, it opens up a whole new can of worms. What was previously just menuing between race events is replaced by exploration. The act of exploration in these games should be utilized to give players time to accommodate to the roads, as they will also serve as the racetracks. But it gets into a whole lot of problems when the developers just throw their hands up in the air and immediately give players a fast travel option from the get-go, which is likely why Midnight Club is an easy superior example. Fast travel wouldn't be utilized until Midnight Club 3, and even then it was limited to the garage, so it forces you to free roam and learn the map as you approach rival racers and events. Even if you don't, then the difficult races will force you to learn either way. In exchange for having no fast travel, the game instead uses its insane sense of speed to accommodate for travel time, keeping the pace between races as balanced as it can be. The series utilized open track racing as well. There are no barriers to stop you or the AI from being creative with your routes. And there's no better game to encapsulate that idea than Midnight Club 2 and 3. These are the two racing games where the map knowledge is king. I've demonstrated this with the challenge videos I've made, that even with some of the slowest cars in the series, it is completely possible to beat the game, ultimately coming down to both map and gameplay knowledge. Said knowledge is also why Sabo exists as a filter, an infamous man who will keep you locked in the worst place in the world until you learn. But then there's Midnight Club LA, the first and only title in the series to allow fast travel between races. In exchange, the game serves a modicum of non-racing events such as the delivery missions from Carol, a good compromise to keep players active in races as fast as possible, while still giving players avenues to take in the scenery and take notes of the road. And this is on top of the fact that these games always have interesting visuals as they take us to different corners of the world: New York, London, Paris, Atlanta, Detroit, San Diego, LA in its two iterations, and Tokyo. Did you know Tokyo is the only map that has managed to be in 3 different Midnight Club games? The developers must have really had fun with the design of the map. What's weird is that the MC3 version of the map doesn't seem to share the collectible galore the other American maps seem to have. In set title, there are the Rockstar logos scattered about all over the maps. Obtaining them simply unlocks customization features, so there's no big pressure to go after them, which makes it more interesting when MCLA decided its collectibles should instead unlock cheat codes. For every 10 barrels you find, a cheat feature is unlocked. But other than these, there's no other reason for exploring the map other than just to bask in its visuals, and I think it's fine the way it is. It's best to leave the exploration to other titles, and there would be no better example than Test Drive Unlimited, a racing game that seems to be more preoccupied at being a rich person driving simulator than being a racing game. This is evident from the way the game itself is structured. If you want to fast travel to its locations, you must discover them first, and since the map itself is made intentionally to be as close as possible in size to its real counterpart, you get a lot of driving, whether it's for the differing brand dealerships, their respective tuning shops, the missions, races, clothing shops, and real estates. But if you're not up for the extended aimless exploration, then the game still allows you to explore via activities, which in turn also works as a way to double or even triple the progression. This is generally why TD1 is looked upon as one of the very best open world racing games to date. The way the map itself is designed is heavily ingrained onto its gameplay and progression. Everything that you do in the game results in progression, whether you want to be a pure street racer, a simple explorer, or a business mogul running around claiming properties and showing off cars like some douchebag content creator. TDU2 generally follows a similar structure with a major change. This time there is a story mode, which unfortunately makes progression feel extremely linear. Whether or not you like the racing, the game forces you to interact with it regardless. This is possibly why a lot of people notice the questionable handling of the game a lot more than TD1. The end result is, while a lot of the things that made the map of TD1 special is still there, you're ultimately forced to race to progress. You can't progress out of doing the side missions, purchasing cars and houses or clothing anymore, despite the game itself having a similar structure of leveling underneath it. But ultimately, both games still serve its purpose as an exploration-focused title. Both maps of Oahu and Ibiza are still some of the best maps to just joyride either alone or with friends to this day, which sort of translates to what Need for Speed tried to achieve with its first foray into open world design. Underground 2, as example, has a lot of similar ideas to what TDU did, minus the more complicated part of having unique dealerships and tuning shops, being split into 5 different sections, unlocking based on your progression, with each area having its own secrets and locations to discover with tutorial messages, cash, tuning, and body shops. Each of these discovered unlocking more features for players to play with. The city of Bayview itself is an interesting place to drive, but it's not exactly a good map to race on. Certain spots are just way too cramped for the handling. The lack of fast travel means you're highly incentivized to learn the environment as you drive, but areas like Jackson Heights are purely hell for the pacing. If that's not enough, then there's the Underground Racing League, which on its own are pretty solid tracks to race on. Other closed track designs like the X Street and Drift events can also get a bit interesting with its layout, so while the open world may not be as fun to race on, I think the problem with Underground 2's map design is the scope and ambition. Bayview still provides a lot of good avenues for exploration and photo shoots, hence why there's a lot of DVD and magazine covers included as part of the content. The stylistic decision to have the whole game take place during nighttime till dawn is also a good decision, as it really allows for the neon lights to burn bright even in our memories. A year later, Most Wanted came into the scene, reintroducing the cops from the linear Hop Suit title, but now on top of an open world map. However, a lot of the design philosophy change has definitely occurred here. There's far less reason to simply explore, as the 3 areas of Rockport features only safe houses, car lots, and tuning shops, with no extra incentives of bonus unlocks. Everything is earned by progressing through the game's blacklist, and races themselves are accessed through the menus. There's no hidden races, cash, or tutorial messages, this time scattered throughout the map. In exchange, the map of Rockport is designed primarily for its core activities first, resulting in most of its races to feel blistering fast and hectic as often as possible. This design direction was made for another purpose. Most Wanted is the first title to bring back cop pursuit into the forefront of progression. Features and rewards for exploration have been replaced completely to accommodate the pursuit content, and it really shows. Instead of collectibles scattered throughout the map, it is now filled by destructible props and hiding spots for players to use against the endless wave of police. And they all take into account specific things such as cost to state and infractions, making this the first ever open world map to fully account the pursuit gameplay, which makes it very unfortunate when Carbon completely ditches the idea. Mind you, Carbon had its own set of identity with the crew territory feature, but because its map design philosophy ended up following Most Wanted's without actually having pursuits as a core progression, it means you're better off fast traveling everywhere. That's not to say that Palman is a badly designed map. With the addition of the crew members like scouts, a lot of the alleyways and shortcut designs need to take into account the AI's capability. Unfortunately, the open world design that was built by Black Box would further deteriorate with Undercover. They did try to change things up so that the map gets more usage with some of its unique missions, but if you only care about the racing aspect, there's literally no reason to not constantly fast travel. The game being rushed didn't help the situation either. After Criterion gets the reins, they would end up giving us more curveballs with a so-called Most Wanted remake that ends up being way too similar to Burnout and an open world iteration of Hot Pursuit with Rivals. While both technically have maps that work fine enough with their gameplay, the change to an open world setting in Rivals meant there's more downtime from just driving to the safe areas in order to progress. Both 2015 and Payback would end up downscaling the cops and their importance, making the biggest joke in 2015 and nothing more than a scripted drama for Payback. While not exactly major, this does mean there's less gameplay elements in both map designs, despite increasing in size, which is still something they seem to prioritize with both Heat and Unbound. Unlike the previous 2 examples, however, these titles try to bring cops back into the spotlight via its gameplay and progression. Heat using rep earned by pursuits basically becoming an extremely simplified version of Most Wanted's pursuit milestones, and then Unbound tries to use cops as a risk and reward feature, where you could lose all of the money you earn from winning races if you get busted with each race. You can't fast travel once the cops become active, and so the game starts to really enforce map knowledge to avoid them. The problem is due to the fairly uninspiring map designs. Both Heat and Unbound have a similar design issue of using one big city area that is easy to distinguish with landmarks to know where you're at without opening the world map constantly. And then there's the big green blob called the Wilderness, where everywhere you look is all green. But that's not the only problem. With Heat, they never really told players that ramps work in a similar manner to the old Pursuit Breakers. And for Unbound, it's mainly because of its awkward handling. Having to juggle both brake to drift and grip handling means the road needs to be designed to accommodate both. It's a thought process and effort that can't be applauded for. Sadly, the map design is just not up there to match up with the desired gameplay feature they implemented. But if there's one thing Need for Speed Open World excels at, it would be with its visual themes. Whether it was by manipulating the passage of time or by using filters and lighting, sometimes they nail it. Same can't be said for collectibles, however. Mostly the same as it ever was in 2008, with collectathon galore and prize cars unlocked. So it's good to see there's no innovation in that section, which is kinda weird when we consider back in 2012, there was a bit of innovation with the launch of Forza Horizon, a game that managed to rock the world with its iteration of the Festival Racer concept. In the past, Festival Racers tended to utilize non-open world design, with Pro Street and Juice 2 as notable examples, making this the very first title to really utilize an open world map for the idea. Thus, we got the Colorado Springs Festival grounds, and honestly, they nailed it the first time. The decorations, lighting, music, and layouts of the main base, they all sell the idea that this is in fact a festival. That also applies to the events themselves, with the showcases, races, and rival characters. For incentives, there are breakable boards scattered all around the map. Each one that you break provides a discount for upgrades, which in turn can give you completely free upgrades and help with both progression and racing. And then there's the barn finds, the alternative to the collectathon hassle for free cars, which in turn works as well to add character into the series, a way to essentially restore and bring life back to the old classic abandoned racing machines. The map, the game, and its theme just perfectly work. for both exploration and racing, which has sort of dwindled with each sequel, but that doesn't mean they didn't try. Horizon 2 is often considered as the best of the multiplayer-focused Horizons, but it had made compromises. The design of its map taking place between France and Italy was a unique choice that gives them some leeway to play with the cultural visual aspect, making it easier to distinguish each location from one another. And if you played the Xbox One version, this was also the beginning of Horizon's extremely open map design, allowing any player to plow through barriers, fences, and any other decorations. However, the collectibles have been changed to fit more the multiplayer-focused gameplay. Boards now simply provide XP or cost reduction for fast travel instead of the upgrade discounts. While the change is understandable, it made the board smashing a lot less desirable, but at least barn finds are still around and the racing is still mostly good as well. Horizon 3 is mostly the same, but there's one major difference. The concept has been flipped, and as the player, we are now playing as a Horizon staff instead of a new participant. As a result, there's mechanics to build the world as you progress. But Horizon 3's map design seems to have been the way it is as a result of feature experimentations. Just look at the DLC expansions for this game. Blizzard Mountain adds a new area with snow constantly, forcing players to deal with the new challenges that comes from its effects towards handling in exchange for a break from the usual environment, which they doubled down with the Hot Wheels expansion, a complete departure from the series' more realism-driven approach for some of the most unique map designs in a racing game. These experiments would pay off for Horizon 4. Instead of making one map for the game, there are 4 different maps corresponding to the different seasons. This opens up for a lot of creativity as each season opens and closes access to specific sections of the map, causing each season to have certain exclusive races, differing effects towards handling, and access towards collectibles. The problem comes in when the player convenience needs to be addressed. Each season lasts as long as a week in real life, so let's say you miss a barn find in the middle of an island, which is only accessible during winter when the lake is frozen. Missing that means waiting a full month for winter to come back. For its DLC, however, there's Fortune Island. There's a good reason people only remember one part of this DLC. Luckily, the LEGO expansion is a different matter. Most of the decorations are made out of Legos and therefore breakable. In addition, the new progression system forces players to experience most of the map, which is an alright change of pace compared to the base UK. So far, every single Horizon title has brought up new technologies and innovation to its map design, leading to new gameplay elements that end up supporting the next title in one way or another. Unfortunately, Horizon 5 would break this chain, which is probably why Horizon 5 has been treated far harsher than the rest. This game tried to bring in all features from past titles, the breakable boards, barn finds, but this title either ends up ditching previous mechanics or half-heartedly implemented them into the game, like the seasonal change. The most noticeable thing is the volcano freezing during winter. They brought back the outpost system to be filled in by different racing disciplines, but they're only utilized for the very light story content. And once you do complete the stories, these areas just become completely ignorable. The Hot Wheels expansion gave something fun for players to race on again, but a bit restrictive now that the map takes place far up on the sky, and the Rally DLC is just mid. But it wouldn't be fair to bring up Horizon 5 without mentioning its strongest aspect. Over its lifespan, the developers continuously have given away more tools and items for players to toy around and make their own tracks with. Understanding this strength, the developers would pick or even create specific custom race designs to fill the weekly seasonal challenges as an additional objective, giving exposure to community members. The tool itself is very useful for a lot of players who wanted to create tracks for whatever purposes they needed, whether it be for build and performance testing, special homage to other racing franchises, a bit of non-racing challenges, and some goofy stuff you make to have fun with other friends. There's one last example I would like to bring out, an outliner to the usual map design choices. This racing game from 1999 singles itself from the rest by being designed as an RPG first, and racing is simply the means to replace what would normally be combat. As such, the map and track designs are separated into 2 different aspects. The open world exploration and interaction uses a top-down view, allowing players to view the environment around them for any notable NPC rivals, locations and routes to their destinations. Before it's racing, the game takes us to a loaded track based on the player's location on the exploration phase. The system keeps players constantly revolving between racetracks, especially during specific sessions to grind for parts. The weakness that comes from this design can be attributed from a lack of proper balanced track distribution, something that will rear its head once players reach Hakone and are greeted by a full toge track even on the basic races. It's an odd system, but one that ties up the racing to its exploration counterpart, even with its imperfections and differences. An interesting take to have linear track designs for its races while having the semi-open world exploration phase? If that's not to your taste, then some traditionally accessed tracks can be played via the unofficial races, featuring closed tracks you'd never see outside of the modes themselves. While an open world map design can give players a ton of avenues to explore, it comes at the cost of having more moving parts that the developers have to pay attention to during its design phases. Going back to the intro, the question of is a game better for being an open world is obviously still a no. It entirely depends on the developers and designers to make it better. Having a game be open world opens up its limitations, which can make them better when done well enough. But sometimes opening limitations can open up more ways for things to go wrong. And I think that's why non-open world titles tend to be more consistent overall, even if its handling and gameplay are questionable. Their design limitations means the developers can simply focus on what makes the map work extremely well with the core gameplay, leading to a much better consistency on its pacing. Yet it seems a lot of games since the 8th generation of consoles only put its open world as a bare minimum without any attempt to innovate or worse, reverse so many years of progression that has been made in the last 2 decades. We've gone to simply relying on graphics and shiny new models and lighting to dazzle audiences. But that's just my take on the whole deal. How about you? Do you think open world racing games are better than the linear ones? And what are some of your favorite map designs in a racing game if there's any I didn't mention here? Let me know down below and I'll see you in the next video.